So I got asked to talk about the difference between miruku and gyunu. Now, this is a tricky question to answer, and actually is more a question about how loanwords work. Not in Japanese, although all my examples are going to come from English to Japanese, Japanese to English, but really you can't answer what's the difference between these two words without understanding the purpose of loanwords. So let's talk about loanwords. Before I start though, a quick mini rant. Loanwords is a really terrible name for what we're talking about. We don't borrow words from a language. Like when English took karaoke and transformed it into karaoke, it's not like we were like, hey Japan, give us that word. You can't use it for a while, but when we're done with it, we'll give it back to you. And we kept really good care of it and made sure that when we handed it back, they wouldn't be mad. We didn't steal it either. We copied it, crammed it into the shape and meaning that we wanted, and then just used it as our word. Even gairaigo, which I think is better, is kind of a misnomer because it puts a label on something that is not complete. Like Kongo, or Japanese words that come from Chinese, are not considered gairaigo, but they absolutely are. And there are words like tempura, which Japanese people don't even realize come from abroad, that don't fit in that category because a lot of this is based on, perception, rather than actual linguistic fact. Whatever that means. This recent book by Hosokawa is an excellent kind of introduction into some of the attitudes Japanese people have towards loanwords and some of the research that's been done on that. Indeed, there are fascinating findings in here, such as that some Japanese people say they never use loanwords, which of course is impossible, meaning that some people don't even think of some words that are absolutely loanwords as loanwords anymore. Basically, the fact of the matter is, when two languages touch each other, they're going to start copying and then transforming words from one another. And that's a really fascinating process, which happens for a number of reasons. Reason one, the most straightforward, is that the new language doesn't have the word, and so they need it. As just a really simple example, Japan didn't have guitars. Guitars were introduced to Japan, and so that's why they now have the word guitar. That said though, taking the word and just kind of transliterating it like that is only one of the many ways that this borrowing can happen. There are also cases where you take a loanword and just kind of translate it via what you already have. Oftentimes in Japanese, this is done via kanji. So for instance, when the concept of democracy was introduced into Japanese, rather than, just going with like demokurashi or something like that, they actually took kanji and put them together to make minshu shugi, which is the word that is used right now. And interestingly, that construction spread back into China, where it is still used now. In English, we often do the same thing, but using, Greek and Latin kind of words, making it seem like these words have existed for a long time when they are in fact borrowings. The third way of borrowing a word like this is then even sneakier, and it's called a calque, and that is when you take a word and just literally translate it, making it seem like it's always been part of your language. And it creates gairaigo, which don't actually advertise the fact that they are gairaigo. For instance, the word for skyscraper in Japanese is matenro, which sounds really, Japanese, but it is heaven scraping tower, which is a skyscraper. It's a literal translation of skyscraper. Or for a more slangy thing, the use of aoba as a translation of Bluetooth, as in the technology. But this is not a one-way street. We have calqued Japanese words in ways you might not even know. Black belt, for instance, is not just because we saw belts and they were black, that is a translation of the Japanese. And in fact, the phrase the uncanny valley is a calque of the Japanese bukimi no tani. Yeah, they came up with it first. The second reason for a loanword to exist is to create a kind of nuance difference. This often happens in a case where there was usually just one word, and now by adding a new word, you're able to kind of separate these two into having different ranges of meaning. Since while in Japanese, menrui or men are literally nudoru and vice versa, I guess, if you look at like the Google images for these two words, you can see that men and menrui are being used to focus on kind of more traditional Japanese noodles, whereas in nudoru is used for both instant and for noodles from like abroad. So while these two words are literally basically the same thing, they do serve a purpose in actually differentiating one from the other. If somebody offers you men and then they give you cup noodles, you might be surprised. And if somebody asks if you want to go out to eat some nudoru and they take you to a ramen shop or a soba shop, there might be some surprise there. Sometimes this new word also helps remove kind of bad vibes that are associated with a word. A famous example in Japanese is that the term shakkin, which is literally borrowed money, has existed for a long time, but was considered a bad thing to do. In Japan, people that were trying to get people to borrow more money wanted to kind of override this impression, and to do so, they borrowed the English word roll, and the idea that kind of starting fresh would help people be more accepting of taking out a, loan. Shakkin? Oh no, don't want that, but oh, this new thing? Yeah, I mean, it's still borrowing money, but it has a new name on it. And again, this is not like only Japanese people do this. A very clear example from the English context is our adoption of the word nori to refer to seaweed. In the Western context, of course, seaweed has not been seen as a food. So when people were trying to get sushi to be popularized, not only did they hide it inside the sushi, that's where the California rolls comes from, they stopped calling it seaweed and started calling it nori, thinking, and I think correctly, that this would help people get over the hesitation they might have eating seaweed. And this is true, of course, of tofu too. You don't want to eat bean curd, but tofu sounds nice, sounds sweet, and of course it is nice. But the change in name helps people kind of get over the fear that would be there. And if you're younger and watching this and be like, wait, people were kind of scared to eat tofu or nori, yeah, this was the thing. There were actual considerations that had to be made in importing these kind of things overseas. And then the third reason that people adopt loanwords and use loanwords is for social purposes. There's obviously no literal difference between kome and rice, right? They're the same thing. It's rice. But if you go to a Japanese restaurant that wants to give off more of a stereotypical Japanese image, you're going to be calling the rice kome, whereas if you go to, a non-Japanese restaurant, they're probably going to have rice. Because it goes with the vibes, making the Western food seem more authentic. Indeed, you'll even find people going above and beyond. Like, we all know, in Japanese, the word for pizza is pizza, normally, but if a place wants to show itself off as, really Italian, they'll spell it like this, which tries to go for a more authentic pronunciation, right? Which, of course, it's not just advertising, it must be true, means you'll get more authentic pizza there. This is why, of course, in the West, that places that are trying to sell Asian-based products will slap a bunch of Asian text everywhere, even though incorrect or very, very weird, trying to make people think that the place is more authentic. These vibes don't just have to be country versus country, language versus language, though. They can be within society as well. I got a similar comment to the my milk one earlier, asking, while in some cases Japanese uses ichigo, in other cases it uses a borrowing of strawberry, which I'll put here if I can find it. And again, there's no literal difference between the two, but the loanword feels newer. So not only does it fit with the kind of foreign image that smoothies, ice cream, etc. have, it also makes you feel young and different. It makes you stand out from the old people. By using the loanword rather than the older word, you are saying that you are new because you understand these new vocabulary. A great scene kind of comparing this is from the show Retsuko, wherein Retsuko and her boss are in an elevator, and they're basically referring to the same pieces of clothing, but the boss uses an older Japanese name for it, while Retsuko uses the new hip name for it, showing again that the words we choose are part of how we define who we are, and perhaps more importantly, who we are not. And then I said 3, but finally, just really quick for a 4th one, some of the time the reason these loanwords exist is just because when two languages touch, it's just because these two languages have come into contact. If there's no reason whatsoever, borrowings can still happen. To give an example, from when I was a kid, I grew up using the word skosh to mean a little bit. It's an Americanism. I believe it's a regionalism, but where I was, which had very, very few Japanese people around me, it was very normal to hear people say, oh, would you like some sugar in your coffee? And hear, oh yeah, just a skosh. Imagine my surprise when I was 18, started studying Japanese, and found out that this comes from, of course, skoshi. Now, did we need this word? No. Does this word add any extra meaning or anything else? No. But it exists for some reason. We use it, and most of the people using it don't even know it's Japanese. So let's revert. Miruku versus Gunu. What's the difference? Well, all of these. From what I can find, Japanese people have been drinking milk pretty regularly since about the Meiji period. That's when it became normalized. Indeed, there were even articles saying, hey, the emperor drinks milk and you should too, that apparently pushed this into the mainstream. Gunu, though, of course, has the kanji for cow in it. So it literally refers only to the milk of cows. While milk in English can have uses for things that I guess traditionally are not milk, like almond milk, you can't really do that with Gunu because cow. Complain about the change of the meaning of milk in English quite a lot, but certainly cow's milk is only used to refer to one thing. There's no such thing as cow's almond milk, unless you give your almond milk to a cow, I guess. So we do have a meaning gap. Gunu is just the milk of a cow, whereas miruku is more all milk, and indeed things that are not literally milk in the sense of coming from an animal. You also then have social vibes as well. I imagine Japanese people would find it a bit odd, for instance, to go to a McDonald's and see Gunu on the menu because miruku has that kind of foreign vibe. But also, there is some overlap. There are times when Gunu is miruku and miruku is Gunu, where there's literally no difference between. And in these cases, people just kind of choose for no real reason whatsoever. Indeed, if you check out Japanese dictionaries, Gunu is listed as a definition of milk, and milk is listed as a definition of Gunu. This means that there is no nice answer to why Japanese people use Gunu over miruku in some cases, and vice versa. But that's okay. There doesn't always have to be. There are, of course, cases where we can. Seaweed's in the water, nori is on my sushi, and never the twain shall meet. But it's okay to have redundant terms in a language. We have them even if we don't borrow anything. This is a good thing. It's favorable stuff. It's a marvelous concept. It's even a pleasing matter. Perhaps it's even a rad phenomenon. So if you're ever looking at some cow's milk and flummoxed as to what you should call it, embrace the ambiguity, because I'd argue that language would be a lot boring if we never had any choices like this to make. See you next time.